Hello, welcome to the Wine with Jimmy channel. I am delighted to have you on board and welcome to a channel dedicated to the world of wine education, helping you drink better. So this is a channel which is designed to help you understand wine better, and a lot of it is aimed at those of you studying wine. Here we have a presentation looking at the world of the WSET Level 4 Diploma, and it will be also accessible for those studying equivalents around the world. This is on red winemaking, and this is whole bunch or berry fermentations. This is going to be an introduction, and now this is a 4-part series. So parts 1 and 2, this one, the introduction and semi-carbonic maceration, are available as free content on this channel, YouTube. The other parts, that's parts 3 and 4, carbonic maceration and then whole berries and bunches with crushed fruit, that is available only on my e-learning portal. That's available at www.winewithjimmy.com. Also over in that world on the portal, it is ad-free, whereas here on YouTube, of course, ads are included. So if you do have any of those niggling comments, questions or concerns, then please do get in touch. You can do so by commenting on this video here on YouTube. Whilst you're there commenting away, you might as well click like and subscribe as well. We have 2 weekly updates here on the YouTube channel looking at the world of wine. Also, you'll see the social media at the bottom of every slide. If you are that way inclined, you can get in touch with us via those handles. So let's begin. And here on this section, we are talking about utilizing pretty much whole berries. So whole berries and bunches, instead of just thinking about the normal process that we have done previously about crushing fruit initially. So let's have a look at this. This is going to be an introduction. So talking about some key terminologies and then some of the key concepts and the styles that they produce in this section. So winemakers can either choose to use whole bunches of grapes or whole destemmed grapes, but the berries are still intact, so these are called whole berries. And to use either entirely crushed fruit or just a small proportion of crushed fruit in the fermentation. So that's what we're going to look at, of course, today on this introduction, but also across the next 3 videos. So first of all, we must understand that if a winemaker, if he or she decides that this is the process that they want to utilize, then we must receive the grapes in a whole condition. So they must be hand harvested for this process to happen. So there you have, of course, a picture of hand harvesting. So obviously things like Beaujolais, for example, hand harvesting must occur because of the process that generally entails. So what else must we be sure about? So it is very important that the stems of those bunches that are being cut by hand, so the stems or the stalks, as we call them as well, they must be fully ripe. The stems make up around 2 to 5% of the weight of the cluster, and they can vary in color from being kind of a real greenish color to a more riper, lignified brownish color, as you'll actually see in our picture just here. Stems begin their life as green photosynthetic material that undergoes that process of lignification, where they turn from being a shoot into wood. So this is important because that transition from the green stem into more of a brownish stem is important in terms of their development and ripeness. Because if you have stems that are exceptionally young and still quite green, then this can actually be a negative, as it can actually impart very herbaceous characteristics potentially in the wine. Whereas stems that are riper will tend to probably add something like tannin or a gentle herbal note. So it's important to understand that stems can add flavors, like I mentioned, of spiciness or herbal, or some tannins. Okay, now with global warming and better understanding of vineyards, so viticulture, so our understanding of viticulture, ripeness in stems seems to be at an all-time high. And this is the likely reason, probably in the last 10, 15 years, that there's been a more debate around the inclusion of stems in the production of wine. It's an old, very old traditional thing. Now, back in the past, everything would have been this process. But over the last sort of 40, 50 years, latter part of the 20th century, people have moved away from stem inclusion. But in the last 10-ish years, it's certainly come back. It's become a bit trendy, dare I say it. Okay, so winemakers then. So we're talking about what stems can give. So winemakers can choose to add stems, which are left over from the destemming process, to crushed fruit fermentation to provide, like I mentioned, some tannin or spicy characteristics. It is not common to include stems when, of course, fermenting grape varieties that naturally have high levels of occurring tannin. So that's something like Cabernet Sauvignon or Syrah, for example. It does tend to deliver a textural smoothness or maybe a silkiness, which is quite attractive, especially in varieties like Pinot Noir. And with Syrah, it can often help bring out the Syrah-ness, I suppose you would say, the characteristic of Syrah, more of that peppercorn, bacon fact characteristic. Often people that are really ambassadors and advocates of stem inclusion with Syrah really explain that it helps Syrah become more Syrah-like. If you make a Syrah without any stem inclusion at all, often you'll find that it's a bit of a sort of monolithic red wine style. Also, I find that that young whole bunch reds often have a kind of grippy, spicy tannic edge, which sometimes could be overlapping in confusement to oak. So often you'll find that the stems could create something where people might get a little bit confused around the oak side of it. Okay, so another thing to actually mention as a benefit here as well is an enhanced aromatic expression of the wine. It's often common to find an elevated sort of sappy green floral edge, which I find quite attractive in certain varietals. And also freshness is another thing that many winemakers will cite. And that's probably due to the fact that if it's done well with whole clusters, it can help wines that are a bit more elegant. And certainly when we talk about potential sort of mini carbonic macerations occurring in vats, which is another story we'll actually cover in part 4 of this series. So quite a few things to mention there, adding potential flavors, textures, tannins, enhancing freshness, also enhancing maybe aromatic expression of the wine as well. Other things to also mention now, this may seem a little bit confusing to you. It is such a debated area about what it brings to some wineries and some regions and weather patterns. They utilize it for certain factors, and in other areas they use it for other factors. So it really isn't just a one-trick pony. And here's another one for you. So stems could be used to mitigate warmer vintages. So, I mean, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, I suppose. On one hand, it could add complexity utilizing whole clusters, and the stalks could help to absorb some of the alcohol, especially in warmer vintages. So that could be a positive in much warmer zones. But on the other hand, the stalks, and specifically when they're riper as well, they'll leach potassium into the wine. And this in turn can raise the pH levels, reducing acidity, but also creating more instability in terms of bacteria within the wine. So that's a bit of a thing to think about there. So it can be a benefit in warmer places. However, it could be an issue with the leaching of potassium into the wine. And some other key things mentioned here as well is that when you've got all of your clusters in a vat with the stems, it actually creates a nice filtering system that enables better drainage through that vat. And also, stems can absorb colour. So the drainage might be quite good, certainly means you won't have to practice too much remontage and pigeage, which is better for more elegant varieties like Pinot Noir, or absorbing colour. Maybe that's a negative. In some areas you want very bright colours, so this may be an issue for something like Pinot Noir again, for example. So quite a few things to talk about and debate there. So just a thing here on the aim. So the objective of a whole berry or whole bunch fermentation is to create an oxygen-free environment for the uncrushed fruit. And the lack of oxygen has several outcomes. The grapes will change from aerobic respiration to anaerobic metabolism. So that's what we're talking down here at the bottom. And that really is talking about a normal oxygen-rich fermentation going to a non-oxygen-rich intracellular fermentation, for example. So in the anaerobic process, some of the sugar in the grapes is converted to alcohol. We'll talk about that in parts 2 and 3 and 4 coming up after this introduction. And this occurs without the involvement of any yeast. And that is what I mean by an intracellular fermentation, okay, which will be discussed in the next few parts. Some other things to mention as well is that malic acid within the grape is also broken down to create ethanol. And this can reduce the malic acidity levels by up to 50%. And that can lower the total acidity and raise the pH of the must or wine. So that's something that really has to be factored in as well. Typical aromas. So as the glycerol levels increase, the texture can also increase, but the distinctive aromas are what you see here. Typically things like kirsch that we have in the bottle just there in the middle, banana, bubblegum, hard candy sweets, things like ethyl cinnamate, so things like strawberry, cinnamony kind of characteristics as well. And cost implication here. So these techniques do not have a significant impact on costs, and it's much more likely that the other parts of the process, so things like hand harvesting, sorting of fruit to ensure whole berries and whole clusters, and the use of oak, which is a bit rarer, they will be the ones that have a greater impact. So this process actually is something which really does come about in history due to sort of social and economic issues in terms of producers originally producing this by mistake, berries, clusters sitting there and fermenting under this way by mistake, and then realizing it's actually a very, very positive way of producing wine in an expensive capacity, but also as a very fruit-driven and low tannin styles, ideal in very warm climates. Notice where Beaujolais is, or Côte de Rhône, or Rioja Joven, or something like a Valpolicella. These can be via these processes, and they're very warm places where you often don't want to be drinking very heavy tannic reds, and these lovely, bright, flavoursome, but low tannin reds are the order of the day. Okay, so that brings me to the end of just the introduction, talking about some of the main concepts that we're going to go through in the next few videos. So please do join me for part 2, looking at semi-carbonic maceration. Lovely step-by-step process with great diagrams there. Carbonic maceration on part 4, and then the other styles in terms of whole berries and bunch fruit mixed with crushed fruit. So do join me for those. If you want to join for all of them, you'll have to go across to winewithjimmy.com. That's the e-learning portal where you have an access to a huge wealth of videos and questions and revision sessions and flashcards. Any comments and questions here on this video, remember, put it in the comments section below here on the world of YouTube, or get in touch via social media. It's been a delight to have you on board. If you do find yourself in London in the United Kingdom, then come and see me. I've got wine bars and schools, so come and see me for a class, a glass, or a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Ciao for now. Bye.